I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted, but in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist, but they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning, but I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. High blood pressure and high cholesterol. That's unfortunate. I can't believe it. Oh, God damn it. All right, fine. Take a little seat, and I'm going to talk to you about what it's like to become deeply middle-aged. I'm not 50 yet, and I just went to the doctor and found out I have high cholesterol and high blood pressure. Can I feel my thick tar-like blood coursing through my veins? Yes. Why don't you just sit back and let me please you instead of me dealing with this midlife crisis by welcoming you to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. It's where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week, we're going to read more of The Legend of the Seventh Virgin by Victoria Holt. A good book. It's not a bad book, but it's the longest book in the world. So again, I'm recording another insanely long episode to try and get through this thing in a reasonable amount of time. About the author, well, her real name is Eleanor Alice Hibbert. She was born September 1st, 1906, and she died January 18th, 1993. So like I said last time, she was lucky enough to live long enough to see the beauty that was Kurt Cobain. She was an English writer of historical romances. She published several books a year in different literary genres, under each with a different name. Jean Pleady for fictionalized history of European royalty. Victoria Holt for gothic romances, which we're reading. Philippia Carr for multi-generational family saga. Well, yeah, want to hear some fun facts? There's not really any fun facts about her. There's not really a whole lot said about her, which is kind of weird because she's been doing this for like 40 years. But there is a lot to be said about the genre of Gothic romance in general. The second generation of Gothic romance was called Genre Romantique. The poetry, romantic adventures, and character of Lord Byron. Characterized by his spurned lover, Lady Caroline Lamb, as, quote, mad, bad, dangerous to know. Yeah, we're another inspiration for the Gothic novel, providing the archetype of the Byronic hero. For example, Byron is the title character in Lady Caroline's Gothic novel, Glenarvan, don't care, 1816. Byron was also the host of the celebrated ghost story competition involving, of course, himself, as always, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley, the most famous one, and John William Polidori, who's not as famous, but I want to read his book on the show. At the Villa Diotati on the banks of Lake Geneva in the summer of 1816, the occasion was productive both for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus in 1818, and Polidori's The Vampire, which I'm dying to read at some point for this goddamn show, in 1819, featuring the Byronic Lord Ruthven. The Vampire has been accounted by cultural critic Christopher Fraley as one of the most influential works of fiction ever written, and spawned a craze of vampire fiction from the theater. Well, with that, the clock's telling me to shut up, so why don't we go down to the library where we can continue reading this book. Well, there you are. Once you get yourself all settled. Do you want to ask me how it feels to find out you have high cholesterol and high blood pressure? No? You're not interested? You just want me to keep reading this book? Doesn't bother you at all, you little idiot. Meliora moved on. Again, this book was clearly scanned in. They took the physical book and scanned it in a scanner, and it screwed up a lot of words, and they decided to resell it on Amazon. I gotta find out who did this. There's gotta be some, person's name attached to this turd. So this just says MSHED, mished on. This is what I'm dealing with. I'm actually getting pretty good at skimming over them or guessing the words as I read along. Meliora mushed on. Can't figure that one out. When she asked me, she said it was the best thing she could do for me. She said that she felt she owed something to us. She couldn't let me be left penniless. I told her that you had been with me for so long that I regarded you as my sister and I wouldn't leave you. Then she thought for a while and said that Mrs. St. Lamston needed a maid and that you would be taken on. And I said I was sure that you would be grateful. Well, she was breathless, and there was an unmistakable gleam in her eyes. She wanted to go and live at the Abbas, even as a companion to Lady St. Lamson. Oh, I knew why. It was because she couldn't bear to think of leaving St. Lamson while Justin was there. I went at once to Granny B and told her what had happened. Well, you always wanted to live in that house, she said, as a servant. Well, there was only one way it could be, aught else, she went on. How? By marrying Johnny St. Lamston. As if. Granny laid her hand on my head, for I was sitting on a stool by the chair. Oh, you be comely, my child. That sounds gross. His sort doesn't want to marry mine, however comely we are. Well, not as a rule, 'tis true, but 'tain't the rule either, that your sort be taken up and educated, now is it? Eh? I shook my head. Well, ain't that a sign? Oh, you don't need to expect things that happen to ordinary folk to happen to E. Do E? No, but I don't like Johnny. Besides, he never would marry me, Granny. There's something in him that tells me he never would. He's different with me than Mariola, though perhaps he won't be now. He wants me. Oh, I know that, but he doesn't care for me one bit. Well, Granny nodded. Well, that's for now, she said. Changes come. Be careful when you're in that house, lovey. Take special care of Johnny, she sighed. I hope that you'd marry maybe, I don't know, a parson or a doctor like. That's what I could have wished for thee. If it had all turned out as we thought, Granny, I don't know whether I'd have married David Killigrew. Oh, she stroked my hair. Oh, I know. Oh, your eyes be fixed on that house. And I've done something too, Karensa. I have bewitched ye. Oh, Granny, if only the parson hadn't died. Well, there comes a time when we all must die. He were a young man, and his time had come. Oh, there's Sir Justin, too. I shuddered, remembering that I had seen when I opened the wrong door. Sir Justin and the Reverend Charles. That's two of them, Granny. 'Tis natural. Oh, you've seen the leaves on the trees come autumn time, and they shrivel and drop and dry. Oh, one by one they fall, and that's because they become to autumn. Well, some of us become to autumn, and the other be quickly, and they will drop from the trees. Yeah. I turned to her in horror. Well, not you, Granny. You mustn't die. And she laughed. Yeah, here I be. But it don't seem like my turn to have come to it. I was afraid in those moments. Afraid of what the future held for me at the Abbas. Afraid of a world which would not contain Granny B. I stood at the window of my room and said to myself, you're here. You live here. And in spite of the circumstances, I was exalted. The room was a small one, and close to those occupied Justin and Judas St. Lamson. Oh, there's a bell high on the wall, and when it sounded, it was my duty to hurry to my mistress. Oh, the furnishings were sparse, as for a maid. It had a small bed, a little cupboard, chest of drawers, 2 chairs, a dressing table with a swing mirror standing behind it, and that was all. But there were rugs on the floor and the same thick velour curtains which hung in the richly furnished apartments. From the window, I looked across the lawns to the hedge, which separated them from the meadow, and I could see the 6 virgins and the disused mine. My mistress had not yet seen me, and I wondered whether she would approve of me, now that Sir Justin was paralyzed. Lady St. Lamston made most of the decisions in the house and said she decided that I should be her daughter-in-law's maid, so I was. Ours had been a chilly reception, very different from the way that I had been greeted when we arrived in our masks. Belter, now implored by the hemp fills, drove us over. Good luck, he said, nodding first to Meliora, and then to me, and his looks implied that we should need it. Mrs. Holt received us, a little smugly, I thought, as though she were rather pleased to see us in this position, particularly me, till send one of my maids up and see if her ladyship is ready to receive ye, she said. Oh, she took us round one of the back doors, emphasizing by a smirk that we had made the mistake of presenting ourselves at the great stone portico which led to the main hall. We should, in the future, Mrs. Holt told us, not be expected to use that door. Mrs. Holt took us to the main kitchen, an enormous room with a vaulted ceiling and stone floors. It was warm, though, on account of the oven, which looked, as I'm sure was, big enough to roast an ox. Two girls sat at the table, cleaning silver. Go up to her ladyship and tell her the new companion and maid have arrived. She wanted to see them herself. One of the girls started for the door. Hey, not you, Daisy, cried Mrs. Holt hastily. Oh, my dear life. Going to her. Then there's just the number 92. Ladyship like that. I hate this book. Whoever did this ripped me off. I wonder how much I paid for this. Probably like $9. Your hair do look like you've been pulled through a hedge backwards, you doll. I noticed that the one addressed as Daisy had a plump blank face, currant-eyed, with wiry hair that drew low, down, almost to the thick bushy eyebrows. Doll was smaller, more lithe in her contrast to her companion, and had an alert expression, which might have been crafty. She had been through the kitchen in the adjoining room, and I had heard the sound of running water. When she emerged, she was wearing a clean apron. This is really boring. Mrs. Holt nodded her head with approval and, when Doll had gone, turned her attention to us. Her ladyship has told me that you will eat with us in the servants' hall. This is addressed to me. Mr. Haggerty will tell you your place. Then to Meliora, I understand you have meals in your own room, miss. I felt a rush color to my cheeks, and I knew that Mrs. Holt noticed it and was not displeased. I foresaw battles to come. I had to stop myself blurting out that I would take my meals with Meliora, and I knew that this would be forbidden, and I should be doubly humiliated. I stared up at the vaulted ceiling and these kitchen quarters with their ovens and spits that had been used for the earliest days, and I discovered later that they were butteries, pantries, storerooms, and cooling houses attached. Mrs. Holt went on, we'll all be sorry, miss, about your bereavement. Mr. Haggerty, we're saying as things weren't be the same like that with the new reverend and the parsonage and you here at the Abbas. Thank you, said Meliora. Well, we were saying, Mr. Haggerty and me, how we hoped you'd settle in well. Her ladyship needs a companion since Sir Justin was afflicted. I hope so, too, answered Meliora quietly. Of course you'll know how things will be run in this big house, miss. She glanced at me, and that quirked played about her mouth. She was telling me that there was a world of difference between my position and that of Meliora. Meliora was the parson's daughter, and a lady born and bred. And I could see that she was thinking of me standing on the platform at Trinket Fair, and now it's all she could see was me. Doll came back to announce that her ladyship would see us now, and Mrs. Holt told us to follow her. Well, we mounted about a dozen stone stairs, at the top of which was a green baize door which led to the main part of the house. We went along several corridors before we came to the main hall and ascended the staircase, which I remembered from the night of the ball. Here be part of where the family do live, said Mrs. Holt. She nudged me. Why you be all pop-eyed, my dear? Reckon you thinking how grand everything be, No, I retorted. I was thinking how far it must be from the kitchen to the dining room. Doesn't the food get cold in transit? Transit, eh? Who be E when he's out? Tain't going to worry, E, my dear. You'll never be eating in the dining rooms. She gave a merry crackle. I caught Meliora's eye and read a warning and a plea. Don't lose your temper, she was telling me. Give it a trial. It's our only chance of being together. Well, I thought that I recognized some of the corridors through which I had run in a panic on the night of the ball. At least we stopped at the door, and Mrs. Holt knocked. When she was told to come in, She said in a voice very different from that which she had used for us, "My lady, the new companion and maid is come." "Bring him in, Miss Holt." Miss Holt jerked her head, and we entered the room. It was large, lofty, with huge windows, looking over the lawns. The fire burned in the enormous fireplace. The room seemed to be luxuriously furnished, but my attention was focused on the woman who sat upright in a chair near the fire. "Come here," she said imperiously. "Then, that will do, Miss Holt. Wait outside until you are summoned." As we advanced, Mrs. Holt retired. "Pray sit down, Miss Martin," commanded Lady St. Lamson. Meliora sat while I remained standing because I was not invited to sit. "We did not discuss very fully what your duties would be, but that is something which you will, of course, discover as time goes on, and I trust you read well. My eyes are not as good as they were, and I shall need you to read to me each day. You will begin your duties throughout the day, and you will... VNRATE. Oh, do you? I guess the VN is the word right? Okay, whatever. I'm accepting this horrible book at this point. Do you write possibly a good hand? I shall need you to deal with my correspondence. These are matters which would ordinarily have been settled before you were engaged, but since we have been neighbors, I felt a point could be stretched in your case. A pleasant room has been allotted to you. It's next to my bedroom so that you can be within caution. I need you during the night." Gross. "Has Mrs. Holt told you that you are to have your meals?" "Yes, Lady St. Lamson." "Well, that seems to have taken care of everything, and you should be shown your room and unpack your bag." She turned to me and lifted the lorgnette from which hung her waist and surveyed me coolly. What's a lorgnette? Or is this a misspelling in the book again? I'm looking it up. A lorgnette. It's a pair of glasses, opera glasses. I just wasted everyone's time. I personally apologize for that. Which hung from her waist and surveyed me coolly. "Ah, this is Carly." "Ah, Carrots of Carly," I said as proudly as I had that day when I stood in the wall. "I've heard something of your history. I have taken you in because Mrs. Martin pleaded with me to do so, and I trust you will not disappoint us. Mrs. Justice St. Lamson is not, I think, at home in the moment, and you will be shown your room and should wait there until she sends for you, which she will doubtlessly do on her return, since she's aware that you are to arrive today. Now tell Mrs. Holt to come in." I opened the door promptly, as Mrs. Holt was hastily stepping back, having, I guess, been crouching forward with ear to the keyhole. "Mrs. Holt," ordered Lady St. Lamson, "show Miss Martin and Carly to their rooms." "Yes, my lady." And as we left, I was aware that Lady St. Lamson's eyes were on me, and I felt depressed. All this is more humiliating than I imagined it would be. All the spirit seemed to have been drained out of Meliora, and it should not be so with me. I made myself feel defiant and angry. Soon, I promised myself I would know my way about this house. Oh, every room and corridor would be familiar to me, and I remember the night that I fled from Johnny in a panic, and I had suffered that I was certainly not going to allow Johnny to humiliate me if, for the time being, I had to submit to his mother's insults. "The family do not have their rooms in this part of the house," explained Mrs. Holt. "This be her ladyship's, and you'm next door. Miss Martin, farther along the corridor, that will be where Mr. Justin and his lady do have theirs." She nodded to me. "You be there, too." Oh, and I was so taken to my room. A maid's room, but not an ordinary maid. I remembered myself, a lady's maid. I was not like Doll or Daisy. I had special gifts, and very soon I was going to make the kitchen staff aware of this. In the meantime, I must go slowly. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like myself at all. I was wearing a black cloak and a black bonnet. Black didn't suit me in any case, but the morning bonnet hid my hair, and it's quite hideous. Then I went to the window and looked out on the lawns and the 6 virgins. That was when I said to myself, "You're here, eh? Ah, you live here." And I couldn't help but feel this triumph because it was where I wanted to be. My melancholy left me. I was exultant and excited. I was in the house as a servant, but that in itself was a challenge. As I stood at the window, the door opened, and I knew at once who she was. She was tall and dark. Though not as dark as I, she was graceful and dressed in pearl gray riding habit, and her skin glowed, presumably with her recent exercise. Oh, she was beautiful. She didn't look unkind. I knew her for my employer, Judith St. Lamston. "Yeah, you're Carly," she said. "I was told you had arrived, and I'm glad you're here. My wardrobe is in a muddle, and you'll be able to put it in order." Oh, that staccato way of speaking immediately called to mind those panic-stricken moments in the cupboard. Tess, madam. Tess, again. That's right. I think it's yes. I think the book's screwed up. It's supposed to be a Y, not a T. I had my back to the window so that I was in a shadow, and the light was full on her face. And I noticed the restless topaz-colored eyes, the rather flaring nostrils, and the full, sensuous lips. "Have you unpacked your bag?" "No." I wasn't going to call her madam anymore than was absolutely necessary. I was already congratulating myself because I believed my employer was going to be more lenient and more considerate than Meliora's. "Well, when you've done so, come to my room. Do you know where it is?" "Nah, of course not. How could you? I'll show you." No, I followed her out of the room a few steps along the corridor. "This door leads to my bedroom and the dressing room. Knock when you're ready." I nodded and went back to my room, and I felt better in her company than I had in Mrs. Rolls. Oh, I took off the hideous bonnet and felt better still. I tidied my hair, which was dressed at the top of my head, and the sight of those black gleaming coils reassured me. Beneath the black cloak, I wore a black dress. What a Meliora's, and I longed to put a touch of scarlet or emerald green at the neck, but I dared not, for I was not supposed to be in mourning. Oh, however, I should wear a white collar as soon as possible. I promised myself. I went along the room as instructed, knocked discreetly, and was bidden to enter, and was sitting at her mirror looking idly at her reflection. And she did not turn around. And I noticed the big bed with the brocade hangings, the long tapestry-covered stool at its foot, the rich carpet and curtains, dressing table, which she sat, and with its wood carving, and a huge candelabra. Huge candelabra on either side of the mirror. It held up by gilded cupids. And, of course, the cupboard, which I remembered oh so well. She had seen my reflection in the mirror and had turned to stare at me. Oh, her gaze resting on my hair. And I knew that taking off my bonnet had transformed me, and that because of it, she was not so pleased with me as she'd been before. How old are you, Carly?" "Nearly 17. "Well, you're very young. Do you think you could do this work?" "Oh, yes. I know how to dress hair and enjoy caring for clothes." "I had no idea." She bit her lip. "I thought you were older." She came over to me, still looking at me. "I'd like you to go through my wardrobe. Make it tidy. I caught my heel in the lace of an evening gown. Can you mend lace?" "Oh, yes," I assured her, even though I'd never done so. It's very delicate work. I can do it. I shall need you to lay out my things every evening at 7. You'll bring up the water for my bath, and you'll help me dress." "Yes," I said. "Which dress do you wish to wear tonight?" Well, she had challenged me, and I was going to prove my efficiency. The gray satin. Very well. I turned to the wardrobe. She sat down by the mirror and began playing nervously with the combs and brushes while I lent the wardrobe and took out the clothes. Man-something the dress. They screwed up this word. Great. There's just literally a character in the middle of it. It's not even a letter. I had never seen anything so magnificent. I couldn't resist stroking the velvets and the satins. I found the gray satin, examined it. It was laying on the bed with the door open. And just as St. Lamston came in. "Oh, my darling." It was like a whisper, but I heard the undertone of restless passion. She had risen and gone to him in spite of my presence. She would have embraced him and given her some encouragement. I wondered what had happened to you. I had expected you, ... Judith! His voice was cold, like a warning. She laughed and said, "This is Carly, the new maid." Well, we looked at each other. We hadn't really changed much from that very young man who had been present when they caught me in the wall. There was no recognition in his glance. He had forgotten that incident as soon as it was over, and the child from the cottages made no impression on him. He said, you will have what you've been wanting." Well, I don't want anything in the world, but he was almost willing her to silence. He said to me, "You can go now, Carly. Is it? Miss St. Lamston will ring when she needs you." I bowed my head And slightly as I walked across the room, I could feel her watching me and watching him at the same time. I knew that she was thinking because of what I had overheard when I was hidden in the cupboard in this very room. She was a violently jealous woman. She adored her husband. She could not bear him to look at another woman, even her own maid. Oh, I touched the coils of hair on the top of my head, and I hoped that the complacency I felt did not show. I was thinking as I went back to my room, the money position didn't really necessarily make people happy. It was a good thing to remember that when one was as proud as I was and found oneself suddenly in a humiliating position. Those first days in the Abbas will stand out clearly forever in my mind. The house itself fascinated me even more than the people who lived in it. Well, there's about a brooding atmosphere of timelessness. It was so easy when one was alone to believe oneself to be in another age. Ever since I had heard the story of the virgins, my imagination had been captured. Often I had pictured myself exploring the Abbas, and this was one of those rare occasions when reality surpassed the imagination. All these lofty rooms with their carved and decorated ceilings, some painted, some inscribed in Latin or Cornish, were delight to me, and I loved to finger the rich stuff at the curtains, to take off my shoes and feel the pile of carpet. I like to sit on chairs and settees and imagine myself, giving orders, and I sometimes talk to myself as though I were a mistress of the house. It became a game I enjoyed, and I never lost the opportunity of playing it. But although I admired it so much, the luxuriously appointed apartments which were used by the family, I was drawn again and again to that wing of the house which was hardly ever used and which had obviously been part of the old covenant. This was where Johnny had taken me on the night of the ball. There was about it an odor which both repelled and fascinated. A dark, dank smell, a smell of the past. The staircases, which seemed to appear suddenly and wind up for a few stairs and stop at the door of the corridor. The stone, which had been worn down by millions of steps. Those strange little alcoves with slit-like windows, which had been the nun cells. And underground, where the dungeons for the place had its prison, I discovered the chapel. Dark and chill, with its ancient triptych, its wooden pews, stone-flagged floor, its altar on which stood candles as though in readiness for the new inhabitants of the house to come worship. But I knew it was never used now because the St. Laurentons worshipped at St. Lamston Church. In this part of the house, the 7 virgins had lived. Their feet had trod the same stone corridors. Their hands had clasped the rope as they climbed the steep stairs, and I began to love the house. And since to love was to be happy, I was not unhappy. In spite of the petty humiliations, during those days I had asserted myself in the servants' hall and had rather enjoyed the battle which had to be waged there. Particularly I assured myself that I had been the victor, and I was not beautiful with the finely chiseled features of Judith de Rees or the delicate porcelain charm of Meliora, but with the gleaming black hair. My big eyes, which were very good at expressing scorn, and my pride. I was more startlingly attractive, and I was tall and slender, almost to thinness, and possessed an indefinable foreign quality, which I was beginning to realize could be used to my advantage. Haggerty was aware of it. He had put me at the table next to himself, in fact, which I knew displeased Mrs. Holt because I had heard her protesting. "Oh, come now, dear," she replied. "It's after all, a lady's maid, you should know, a slight different from the maid of yours." Where she be from, I'd like to know. Well, that can't be helped. 'Tis what she be that we have taken account on. What she be, I thought, smoothing my hands over my hips. Each day, each hour, I was becoming more and more reconciled to my life. Humiliations? Yes, but life in the Abbas would always be more exciting than anywhere else, and I lived here. Seated at the table in the servants' hall gave me an opportunity to study the members of the household who lived below stairs. Mr. Haggerty at the head of the table, little piggy eyes, lips inclined to slackness at the sight of a succulent dish, or or female, ruling the roost, the kitchen, the king of the kitchen, the Abbas butler. Next on importance, Mrs. Holt, the housekeeper. Self-styled widow, but very likely using Mrs. as a courtesy title, hoping that one day Mr. Haggerty would put in the position of Mrs. Be hers by right, in which he had changed her name from Holt to Haggerty. Mean, sly, determined to keep her position, head of the staff under Mr. Haggerty. Then Mrs. Salt, the cook, plump, has become a cook, devoted to food and gossip. Oh, her disposition was a mournful one. She had suffered in her married life and had left her husband, whom she talked of whenever possible as him. She had left him when she came to the Abbas from the very tip of the Cornwall, west of St. Ives, and she was expressed great fear that one day he would catch up with her. There was Jane Salt, her daughter, a woman about 30, who was a parlor maid, quiet, self-possessed, devoted to her mother. Then Doll, daughter of a miner, 20 or so, with crimped fair hair and a taste for electric blue, which she wore when she had an hour or so off to go courting, as she said. Simple-minded Daisy, who worked with her in the kitchens, followed her around, imitated her, and longed to be courting, and their conversation seemed to be confined to this subject. These servants all lived in the house, but there were also outside servants who came in for meals. Pelor and Mrs. Pelor and their son Willie. Pelor and Willie were attached to the stables, while Mrs. Pelor did housework in the Abbas. Oh, there were 2 mews cottages and another occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Trelance and their daughter Florrie. The opinion seemed to be that Florrie and Willie should marry. Everyone but the couple concerned thought it would be excellent, an idea. Only Willie and Florrie held back, but as Mrs. Holt said, they'll come to it in time. So it was a large party who sat round the great refectory table for meals. After the family had eaten, Mrs. Holt and Mrs. Salt together saw that we lacked for nothing. Oh, and if anything, we ate better than those who sat down in the stately dining room. I began to enjoy the conversation, which was very revealing, for there was little that remained unknown to these people, whether it concerned the house or village affairs. Doll could always enliven the table with stories of her family's adventures in the mines. Weird. Mrs. Holt declared that some of her fair talk gave her the creeps, and that she should shiver and take the opportunity to move closer to Mr. Haggerty for protection. What stories is this kid telling? Like, I saw a little naked man down in the mines, and he had no hair. I don't know. Anyways, Mr. Haggerty was not very responsive. He usually busy prodding my foot under the table, which he seemed to think was a way of letting me know he approved of me. Mrs. Salt would tell hair-raising stories of her life with Liam and the Pelors and the Trances. He would tell us the new vicar was settling in and that Mr. Hemphill was a real noisy Parker. No mistake, prying here and there, prying there, and had a nose in the kitchen before he had time to dust a chair for her to sit on. It was that very first night around the servants' table that I learned that Johnny was at the university, wouldn't be at the Abbas for some weeks. I was pleased. His absence would give me a chance to establish my position in the house. I had fitted into the rhythm of the days. My mistress was by no means unkind. Indeed, she was generous. And during those first days, she had given me a green dress, which she had tired, and my duties were not arduous, and I took pleasure in dressing her hair, which was of much finer texture than mine. And I was interested in her clothes. I had long periods of freedom, and then I would go to the library, take a book, spend hours in my room reading while I waited for the bell to ring. Meliora's life, it's not so easy. Lady St. Lamston had determined to make the fullest use of her services. She must read to her for several hours a day. She must make tea for her often during the night. She must massage her head when she had a headache, which was frequent. She must deal with Lady St. Lamston's correspondence, take messages for her, accompany her when she went visiting in their carriage. And in fact, she was rarely free. Before the first week was out, Lady St. Lamston decided to tell Meliora, who had nursed her father, that it might be useful with Sir Justin. So that when Meliora was not in attendance on Lady St. Lamston, she was in the sick room. Poor Meliora. In spite of the meals in her room and being treated as though she were almost a lady, her lot was much harder than mine. Oh, it was I who visited her in her room. As soon as my mistress went out and she had a habit of going for long rides, often alone, I would go to Meliora's room in the hope of finding her there. Oh, we really had long together before the bell would ring and she'd have to leave me, and then I would read until she returned. Meliora, I said to her one day, how can you endure this? How can you, she reiterated. Well, it's different for me. I haven't been used too much. Besides, I don't have to work as hard as you do. Well, it has to be, she answered philosophically. I looked at her. Yes, it was satisfaction I saw in her face. I marveled that she, the daughter of the parson, who had, oh, I hate it when they do that, had, same word, twice in a row in the same sentence. Her own way, she had been pampered and adored. It would slip so easily into the life of servitude. Meliora is a saint, I thought. I liked to lie in her bed watching her, while she sat in a chair, ready to jump up at the first tinkle of the bell. Meliora, I said one early evening, what do you think of this place? The Abbas? Well, it's the most marvelous old house. Well, you can't help being excited about it, I insisted. No, nor can you. What do you think about when the old woman bullies you? Well, I try to make my mind blank and not care. No, I don't think I could hide my feelings as you do. I'm lucky. Judith is not so bad. Judith, said Meliora slowly. All right, Mrs. St. Lamson. She's a strange woman. She always seems overexcited as though life is terribly tragic, as though she's afraid. There, I'm talking in that breathless way as she does. Justin's not happy with her, said Meliora slowly. Well, I reckon he's as happy as he could be with anyone. What do you know about it? Well, I know he's as cold as a fish, and she's hot as a fiery furnace. Well, you talk nonsense, Karen, sir. Do I? I see more of them than you do. Don't forget that my room is next to theirs. Do they quarrel? Oh, he wouldn't quarrel. He's too cold. He doesn't care about anything, and she cares too much. I don't dislike her, after all. If she doesn't care about her, then why'd he marry her? Oh, stop it. You don't know what you're saying. You don't understand. Oh, I know, of course. He's bright and shining knight, and he always felt that about him. Yeah. Justin's a good man. You don't understand him. I've known him all my life. The door of Meliora's room was suddenly thrown open, and Judith stood on the threshold, her eyes wide, her nostrils flaring. She looked at me lying on the bed, at Meliora, who had started up for a chair. Oh, she said, I didn't expect. I rose from the bed and said, do you want me, madam? The passion had died out of her face, and I saw an immense relief there. Were you looking for me? I went on helpfully. Now there was a flash of gratitude. Yes, Carly, I thought you'd be here. I went to the door. She hesitated. I shall want you to come a little earlier this evening, 5 or 10 minutes before 7. Yes, madam, I said. She inclined her head and went out. Meliora looked at me in astonishment. What did that mean? She whispered. Oh, I think I know, I answered. She was surprised, wasn't she? Do you know why? It was because she found me here when she was expecting to find... Who? Justin. Oh, she must be mad. Well, she's a Doris. Remember that day when we were on the moors and you told me their story? Yes, I remember. And you said there was a madness in the family. Well, Judith is mad. Mad about her husband... Burp, though she thought he was here with you. That's why she burst in like that. Didn't see how you please. She was to find that I was the one talking to you and not him. It's a madness. Of sort. You mean to say that she's jealous of me and Justin? She's jealous of every attractive woman who comes within his vision. I looked at Meliora, and she couldn't hide the truth from me. She was in love with Justin St. Lamson. She always had been, and I felt very uneasy. There were no longer baskets of food to be taken for Granny, and I could well imagine Mrs. Holt and Mrs. Salt rising, shocked voices that I suggested doing so, and I still found time to visit her now and then, and it was on one of those occasions that she asked me if, on my way back to the Abbas, I would deliver some herbs to Hetty Pengaster. Hetty was waiting for them, and Hetty, I knew, was one of Granny's best customers, so I agreed to go. That was how I found myself one hot afternoon, making my way from Granny's cottage towards Lamston Barton, the Pengaster farm. I saw Tom Pengaster at work in the fields, and I wondered if it were true that he was courting Doll, as he had hinted to Daisy. Oh, it'd be a good match for Doll. The Barton was a prosperous farm, and Tom, not his pisky-mazed brother Reuben, who did odd jobs, would inherit it one day. I passed under the tall trees in which the rooks nested. Every May, the shooting rooks at Lamston Barton was quite a ceremony. Oh, the rook pies, which are made by Mrs. Pengallon. It was a cook at the Barton, was considered a delicacy. Oh, and a pie was always sent up at the Abbas and graciously accepted. And Mrs. Salt had mentioned it recently and how she served it with clotted cream, and how Mrs. Holt had eaten too much and suffered accordingly. Well, I reached the stables, and there was stabling about for 8 horses and 2 loose boxes, and went on for the outbuildings, and I could see the pigeon loft and hear the cooing of the birds with their monotonous phrase, which we said sounded like, "Take 2 cows, Taffy." That's fun. And as I was passing the mountain block, I saw Reuben Pengaster coming around by the pigeon loft, holding a bird in his hands. Reuben walked in a queer, loping way. Oh, there must always have been something strange about that, Reuben. In Cornwall, they say that in a litter, there's often a windick. I think that's a mess up in the book again, which means one not quite up to the standard of the others. And Reuben was the Pengaster Winnick. I have always felt repulsed by the subnormal, and although it was broad daylight with the sun shining brightly, I could not suppress a slight shiver as Reuben came toward me with that particular gait of his. Oh, his face was unlined, like a very young person. His eyes were porcelain blue, and his hair was flaxen. And it was the set of his jaw, and the way in which his slack lips parted, that betrayed him as pisky-mazed. "Hello there," he called. "Where be to, then?" And as he spoke, he caressed the bird's head, and I could see that he was far more aware of that than he was of me. I brought some herbs for Hetty," I told him. "Oh, herbs for Hetty?" Yeah, he laughed, high-pitched, innocent laughter. "What do you be waiting there for? To make her pretty?" His expression became bellicose. "Reckon our Hetty be pretty enough without." For a second, his jaw was thrust forwards, as though he were ready to attack me for suggesting she wasn't. This is really weird. It's for Hetty to say if she wants the herbs," I retorted sharply. Oh, that innocent laughter rang out again. "Yeah, I reckon so," he said, "although Saul Cundy do think she be a rare fine un." "I dare say. Oh, you may say she bespoke for," he went on almost shyly, "and there was no mistaking his love for and pride in his sister." This is getting weird and gross. I hope they'll be happy." "Oh, they'll be happy. Saul's a big fine man, Captain Saul. Oh, they miners have a mind to their manners, with Saul. If Saul do say go, oh, they do go. And if Saul do say come, they do come." I hate this entire dialogue. "Mr. Fedder isn't no important, I do reckon, than Captain Saul Cundy." I hate this. I was ready to let the point pass, please do, for I was anxious to deliver the herbs and be gone. Yes, please. "Where is Hetty now?" I asked. "I reckon her'll be in the kitchen with the old Mother Pengallon." I hesitated, wondering whether to give him the packet and ask him to take it to Hetty, but I decided against that. "I'll go find her," I said. "Well, I'll take ye to her," he promised, compromise, where'd I get that word from, and walked beside me. "Coop, coop, coop, coop," he murmured to the pigeon, and I was momentarily reminded of Joe, lying on the towel fat, mending a pigeon's leg, and I noticed how big his hands were, and how gently they held the bird. Is she falling in love with this weirdo? He led me to the back of the farmhouse and directed my gaze to the ridge tile which served as a decoration. Oh, there was a ladder propped up against the wall, and he was doing a good job on the farmhouse. Some of those tiles are loose," he said, confirming this. "Would never do. What if the little people came afoot in it in midnight?" Again, that high-pitched laughter, which was beginning to irritate me so much that I wished Reuben would go. I knew he was referring to what he called the Pisky Pow, that ridge tile on which the Piskies were supposed to come and dance after midnight. If it had been a bad state of repair, it was said to have angered them, and the Piskies' anger could bring bad luck on a house. It was natural, I suppose, that one who was said to be pisky-mazed, I hate this term, could be to believe in these legends. "Oh, 'tis all right now," said Reuben. "I see to that, and then I thought I'd take a look at my little birds." I read that weird. He led me through the stone-floored wash house into a flagged passage where he threw open a door to show me an enormous kitchen with 2 large windows, an open fireplace, as well as a clome oven, red tiles, and a huge refractory table, and the oak beams hung a ham, sides of bacon, and bundles of herbs. Seated at the table, peeling potatoes, was Mrs. Pengallen, who had been a cook-housekeeper at the farm since the death of Mrs. Pengaster, a large, comfortable-looking woman, who at the moment seemed unusually melancholy. Hetty was in the kitchen, ironing a blouse. "Well," said Hetty as we entered, "bless me, if isn't Carrots of Carly. My dear life, we be honored. Come in, if that's too grand for the likes of we. Get along with thee," put in Mrs. Pengallen. "'Tis only Carrots of Carly. Come in, my dear, and tell me if you've seen my tabs about." "You lost your cat then, Miss Pengallen?" I asked, ignoring Hetty. "These last 2 days, my dear, 'tis so unlike him. Out all day he's been before now, but always come home by supper time, always purring for his saucer of milk. Well, I'm sorry I haven't seen him. I'm worried, wondering what can have become of him. No, I can't but think he'd been caught in some kind of trap. 'Tis a terrible thing that have happened, my dear, and I can't get it out of my mind. I've been wondering whether to come along to see your granny. Maybe she could tell me something. Oh, she have done wonders, like for Mrs. Tom's. Her breathing be that much better, and all her did was, as your granny said, took the webs of spiders, rolled them into a ball, and swallowed them. Magic! I do reckon it to be on your granny a wonderful woman." "Yes," I agreed. "She is a wonderful woman. You tell her when you next see her that I've had no more trouble with that sty on my eye since I rubbed Tab's tail on it. As she did say, my poor little Tabs. Where is he to be? I can't think, and it's no rest for me till he's found." "Well, perhaps he's being fed somewhere else, Miss Pengallen," I suggested. "I don't think so, my dear. He knows his own home. He's never stayed away for so long. A regular home lover. That's my Tabs. Oh, my dear life, if only he'd come back to me." I'll keep my eyes open. "And ask your granny if she can help me." "Well, Miss Pengallen, I'm not going back there just now." "Oh, no," put in Hetty meticulously. You'll be working up to Abbas now? Along of Doll and Daisy? Doll's pretty near courting our Tom, so she tells us all about it. Oh, my dear life, I wouldn't care to work for that family." "Well, I don't think it's likely that you'll have the opportunity," I retorted. Oh, what a little turd. Reuben, who had been standing there watching us closely as he talked, burped, joined in Hetty's laughter. I said coldly, "I came to bring you herbs." Hetty seized on them and thrust them in her pocket of her gown, and I turned to go. "Oh, and don't you forget about ask your granny," said Miss Pengallen. "I don't rest the nights wondering what have happened to my Tabs." It was then that I intercepted the look between Hetty and Reuben, and I was startled because it seemed to me, evil. Oh, and they were sharing some secret. I fancied that while it was amusing to them, it would not be so to others. I had a great desire then to get out of Pengaster's kitchen. I was so immersed in my own affairs to notice that it was happening to Meliora. I would have often hear raised voices in the rooms near my own, and I guessed that Judith was upbraiding her husband for some supposed negligence. All these scenes are becoming a little monotonous. Although I did not dislike my mistress, my sympathy, if my feeling went deep enough to be given such description, was for Justin. Even though he scarcely ever addressed me, and the time he seemed conscious of my presence was when Judith embarrassed him by her excessive shows of affection. I did not believe he cared greatly for his wife, and I could well imagine how tiresome it must be to have someone continually demanding affection. Still, It was a state of affairs which I accepted and did not notice the rising tension, nor the effect it was having on the three people concerned. Justin, Judith, and Meliora. Being so self-centered, I forgot temporarily that Meliora's life could take as dramatic a turn as my own. Two things happened which seemed of great importance. The first was my casual discovery of what had happened to Mrs. Pengallon's cat. It was Doll who betrayed the information. She asked me if Granny would like some complexion herbs for her, like those that she had given Hetty Pengaster, and I said that I knew what they were, and next time I went to go see Granny, I'd bring her some. She happened to mention that when I discovered Hetty's, Miss Pengallon was worried about her cat. Doll started to giggle. She won't ever see that cat again, she said. Well, I suspect she found a new home. Yes, underground. I looked at Doll questioningly, and she shrugged her shoulders. It was Reuben killed him. I was there when he done it. Proper wild he were. The old cat got into one of his pigeons, and then he got the old cat and killed it with his bare hands. And now he daren't tell her Miss Pengallon. Well, Reuben says it serves her right. She knew that the old cat was after her pigeons and knew the pigeon left the house. There'd be a tied square garden behind it, and he buried that pigeon there, and the cat too. One the martyr, he did say, one the murderer. He were real mazed that day, I do declare. I changed the subject, but I did not forget, and that day I went to go see Granny. I told her about the cat and what I had discovered. He's buried at the back of the pigeon's house, I told her. So if Miss Pengallon asks you, you'll know. Yeah, Granny was pleased, because she's a charlatan. This is weird. And she's weirdly the hero. She talked to me then of her reputation as a wise woman and explained the importance of noticing everything that happened. Oh, no little detail should be ignored. No one ever knew when it would be needed. I did not take Doll's herbs with me on that occasion because I did not want her to think I'd seen Granny. On the very next day, Miss Pengallon called on Granny, begging her to use her magic and find the cat. Granny, who was able to direct her to the little garden behind Reuben's pigeon house, when Miss Pengallon saw the recently disturbed ground and found the body of her beloved cat, she was filled with rage against his killer. Oh, and grief for the loss of her pet. And when these emotions had subsided a little, she was overwhelmed by admiration for Granny's skill, and for a few days the main topic of the cottages was the power of Granny B. Gifts began to arrive on her doorstep, and there was a real feast in the cottage. I went to see her, and we laughed together over what had happened, and I believed I have the wisest granny in the world, and I was determined to be like her. I took back Doll's herbs, and so great was her belief in them that they were completely effective, and the spots on her back for which she needed them completely disappeared. Granny was possessed of supernatural powers. Granny was aware of events which should not possibly have been witnessed. She could cure ailments. She was a person to be reckoned with. As everyone knew and how she doted on me, I must be treated with especial care. Oh, and the fact that we ourselves had brought about the estate by turning a good fortune to advantage was doubly gratifying. My dream of achieving all that I had set out to do was back with me, and I believed that I could not fail. We were seated at the table having supper. It had been an exhausting day. Judith had been riding with Justin, and they had set off in the early morning. She looked charming in her pearl gray habit, and with her little touch of emerald green at the throat. And when she was happy, she looked very beautiful. And when she was contented on that day because Justin was with her, but I knew she could not be contented for long. Always she was watchful, and some small gesture, some inflection of Justin's voice would set her wondering if he were growing tired of her. Then the trouble would start. She would ask interminable questions, and she would demand passionately whether he loved her still and how much he loved her. And I had heard her raised voice and his low one, and then the more intense she grew, the more remote he was. And I did not think he handled her as well as he might, and I believe he was aware of this, for sometimes I saw the relief in his face when she left the room. But that morning, they had set off in good spirits, and I was delighted because this meant that I would have some time to myself, and I would go see my granny. And it was useless to hope for a little time of Meliora because Lady St. Lamston saw that she was kept busy all the day through. Poor Meliora. Oh, my lot was easier than hers, and yet at times I thought she looked supremely happy. At others, I was not so sure. But one thing I did know, she was growing more beautiful since we had come to the Abbas, and I spent the morning with Granny in the early afternoon when Judith had come back alone, and she was distraught, so much so that she confided in me. I suppose because she felt the need to talk to someone, she and Justin had ridden over to her family for a luncheon. And afterguards? Again, the book screwed up. It's probably afterwards. Afterguards, they had left together, and, she paused, and I guessed that they had quarreled. I pictured them having luncheon in their gloomy house. Perhaps their mother was there, a little vague, and they would be wondering all the time what she would do next. That house was full of shadows, and the legend of the monster would be hanging over it. Oh, I imagine Justin wishing he had never married her, perhaps wondering why he ever had. And I pictured him making some remark which upset her, and then the passionate demands for him to show his affection. And the quarrels. Oh, they would have left Doris together, and he angrily would whip up his horse and ride away from her, anything to escape, and she would weep, and I could see that she had been weeping. Too late, she would try to follow him and would realize that she had lost him. And then began to wonder where he was. Oh, she had come back to the Abbas to find him, and when he was not there, she was overcome by jealous anxiety. I was mending one of her gowns when she burst in on me. Karen, sir, she said, for she had guessed that I objected to being called by my surname, and this is one of the charms about her, that it had a wish to please everybody, providing doing so made no great demands upon her. Where is the companion? Miss Martin, I just stammered. Oh, of course. Where is she? Find her at once. You wish to speak to her? Speak to her? No. I wish to know if she is here. I understood. I wondered fleetingly if Justin might be with Meliora. Oh, what a calm, pleasant companion Meliora would seem after this demanding, passionate woman. In that moment, it did occur to me that a dangerous situation was arising. Now, for me, except for whatever touched Meliora must touch me too, for our lives had become intermingled. I might have brooded on this, but for that was soon to follow, which affected me more personally. Jesus criminy. That was 56 minutes. That is a long stretch. Why don't we, I don't know, grab a beer, go down to the basement, and I'll play you a little something on my guitar, where I will let you know about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House. Go on, get downstairs. I'll see you down there. Oh, there you are. You made it. Thanks for coming down to my water basement, where I'm going to read to you the latest books from Penguin Random House. You know what kind of books I rarely ever get to talk about here in my basement? That would be science fiction fantasy. So we're going to learn about The Courtship of Princess Leia. It's a Star Wars Legends book by Dave Wolverton. About the courtship of Princess Leia? Sure. Before the marriage of Princess Leia Organa and I always thought her last name was really weird. And Han Solo, another suitor, threatened to derail their star-crossed romance. Ooh, it's a little side story that wasn't in the movie. Seeking rich, powerful allies to bring into the Rebel Alliance and a new home planet for the refugees from her native Alderaan. Princess Leia considers a proposal that could tip the balance of power against the evil empire. The Hapes Consortium of 63 Worlds. If I had not grown up with Star Wars as something that I watched all the time as a kid and everything like that and obsessed over as a child, I would think all these made-up names would be really, really annoying, because science fiction always has the most annoying made-up names. The Consortium of 63 Worlds is ruled by the Queen Mother, who wants Leia to marry her son, the dashing and wealthy Prince Isolder. See? Han Solo, a name I'm familiar with. It doesn't bother me. Always dreamed of marrying Leia himself, and now he makes a desperate final gamble to win her back. Tricking Leia into accompanying him, Han flees with her to the beautiful and untamed planet Dathamor. Oh, God. Here, where he hopes to win her heart. Fearing the Imperious Queen's reaction to Han's rash move, Luke Skywalker forms an unlikely alliance with Prince Isolder to track down the runaways. soon Isolder, Luke, and R2. Oh, R2G2. See, now I'm not offended because I grew up with that name. Will be at the center of an adventure leading to an awesome treasure. A group of force-trained quote-unquote witches, and a showdown with an invisible foe. Well, that's the courtship Princess Leia, Star Wars Legends book by Dave Wolverton. It's part of the Star Wars Legends. Its category is space opera. You can get a paperback for $17 from Amazon. Oh, on October 24th. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Bookshop.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's, Target, and you know that Dave Wolverton and the whole category of space opera has finally hit mainstream when they're on the beautiful hollowed shelves of Walmart. Well, with that, why don't we go back upstairs and brush off the dewy moisture we've accumulated here in the basement, and we can continue reading the rest of this incredibly long book. Well, all right, sit your butt down. We're going to have to get through this book somehow by reading another hour's worth. It's not bad. I keep saying this. The writing is good. The story is letting you learn about the characters. It's letting you care about them before whatever the hell happens later on. But oh my God, we're like halfway through the book and I feel like we're still just getting started. But again, it's still good. It's just so long. I said quietly that I would see if I could find Meliora, and I took my mistress back to her room and made her lie down on her bed and left her. It did not take long for me to find Meliora. She was in the garden with Lady St. Lamson, who was picking roses. Meliora walked beside her, carrying the basket and the clippers, and I could hear Lady St. Lamson's imperious orders and Meliora's meek responses. So I was able to go back to my mistress and tell her that Meliora was in the garden with her employer. Well, Judith relaxed, but she was exhausted. I was rather alarmed because I thought that she was going to be ill. Her head ached, she told me, and I massaged her forehead and rubbed her eau de cologne. Rubbed her in eau de cologne. I'm sure it just means like perfume, but I gotta see if this is a thing. Eau de cologne, toilet water with strong characteristic scent. One of my kids who went to French immersion told me that parfum or eau de toilette just means toilet water, which is hilarious. I drew the curtains and left her to sleep, but she did not rest for more than 10 minutes before she needed me again. I had to brush her long hair, which she said soothed her, and every time we heard a movement below, she'd rush to the window hoping I knew that it would just in return. This is a situation which could not go on. Something must happen sooner or later to change it. It was like the gathering of a storm. It was natural that storm should break, and I was beginning to be a little uneasy about Meliora. And that was how I was feeling when I went down the hall to take supper with my fellow servants. I was tired because Judith's emotions had in some measure been communicated to me. And Meliora was a great deal in my thoughts. Well, I knew as soon as I sat down that Mrs. Holt had some news, which she was longing to tell us. It was typical of her that she held back the tidbit for as long as possible. And when she was eating, she'd always leave the best pieces on her plate until the end, and it amused me to watch her eyeing them with anticipation while she ate. That was how she looked now. Mrs. Salt was talking in her low monotonous voice about her husband, and her daughter Jane was the only one who was really paying attention. Doll kept patting her hair, in which she had tied a new blue ribbon, which she was whispering to Daisy that Tom Pengasser had given to her. Haggerty sat down next to me, bringing this chair a fraction closer. He breathed into my face, weird, and said, "Bit of trouble in high places, my dear." "Yeah, trouble?" I asked. "Oh, him and her, of course." Mrs. Holt was watching us. Oh, her lips pursed, her eyes disapproving. And she was telling herself that I was leading poor Mr. Haggerty on. Such a belief suited her better than the true one was that the woman who had always deluded herself into believing what she wanted to, and while she watched us, she was smiling slyly, thinking of that tidbit of news which she was planning to startle us. See, the writing's good. Also, she does the same thing with the last bit of delicious morsel on her plate. She waits till the very end. I mean, it's good writing. It just goes on forever. I did not answer Mr. Haggerty because I disliked discussing Judith and Justin in the kitchen quarters. Ha! Went on Haggerty. She comes in a rare patty, and I saw her. Well, put in Mrs. Holt portentously, it'll go to show that money ain't everything. Haggerty sighed piously. We, a lot to be thankful, me thinking, God, I hate this. Trouble comes of all sorts, went on Mrs. Holt. Give me a clue to the news she was withholding. They be gentry or the likes of we. We never spoke a truer word, my dear, sighed Haggerty. And Mrs. Salt started to cut the great pastry which she had made that morning, and Mrs. Holt signed to Daisy to fill the mugs with ale. I reckon there's trouble coming, said Mrs. Salt, and if anyone knows trouble when they see it coming, that's me. Why, I remember 4 dots, but Mrs. Holt was going to let the cook ramble back to her reminiscences. It's what you might call a one-sided relationship, and them sort ain't good for nobody. If you were to ask me... Haggerty nodded in agreement and turned his rather bulging eyes on Mrs. Holt while his foot touched mine under the table. There's a lot of foot touching going on at the table that should creep these people out, but for some reason they think it's just a normal way of communicating. Mind you, went on Mrs. Holt, whose pleasure it was always to feign great knowledge of relationships between the sexes, one thing I'd say, Mr. Justin ain't the man to get himself into that sort of trouble. With another woman, you mean, my dear? Asked Haggerty. Well, that's exactly what I mean, Mr. Haggerty. That's the trouble, if you ask me. One blowing hot and one blowing cold. Twould seem he don't want one woman. Let be 2. Well, they're a wild family, put in Mrs. Trelance. I had a brother who worked over at Doris. We all know that story, Mrs. Holt silenced him, and they say, put in Doll excitedly, that the last time when the moon was full, ... That'll do, Doll, said Mrs. Holt, who would not allow the lower servants to discuss the family, it being a privilege of the higher ones to do that. No, I remember once, said Mrs. Trelawney dreamily, seeing that Miss Martin over there, that when her father were alive, a real pretty creature. Oh, she were on her horse, and Mr. Justin were helping her off it. And I said to Trelance here, I said, there's a pretty picture for you. And Trelance said that if the parson's daughter were a mistress to Abbas, one day we wouldn't have a prettier, or couldn't have a prettier nor sweeter. Mrs. Holt turned an angry glance on Mrs. Trelance. Well, her be the companion now who had heard the companions being the mistress. Well, she couldn't now, him being married, said Mrs. Salt, though men being men, 4 dots, she shook her head, and there was silence around the table. Mrs. Holt said sharply, but Mr. Justin hate men, Mrs. Salt, and it ain't no good that you're thinking all men are like the men of yours because I can tell you different. She smiled secretly and then went on in a voice portentous with promise. And talk about trouble. We were all silent, waiting for her to go on. And she had come to the tidbit that we all had our attention, and she was ready. It'd be hilarious if all of a sudden she picked up the last morsel of delicious meat that's on the plate, it's completely empty except for that last piece, and then just shoved it in her mouth and just looked at him. Her ladyship sent me this afternoon. She wanted me to see that a certain person's room be made ready. She weren't very pleased, I could tell ye. There had been a terrible trouble. And as soon as Mr. Justin come in, she sends for him. And I was to watch out, she said. And the minute he come in, I was to go to her. So I watched, and I saw him come in, and she was down there, Mrs. Justin, all tears and clinging to him. Oh, darling, where have you been? Burp. There was a titter around the table. But Mrs. Holt was eager now to get on. I stopped all that. Her ladyship wants you to go to her at once, Mr. Justin. I said, her ladyship orders that there shouldn't be any delay. Oh, so he looks pleased like. Anything to get away from her. Darling, darling. And he does go straight up to her ladyship. And now I knew what had happened because she told me. Though she didn't tell me why, but I was polishing in the corridor outside the lady's room when I happened to hear her say, "It's on account of some woman." Oh, this is such a disgrace. I thank God his poor father can't understand. If he could, it would kill him. Oh, I says to myself, trouble comes, be we gentry or the likes of we, and it be true. She paused, lifting her mug of ale. Oh, damn it, I wanted to eat that last piece of food. Lifting a mug of ale, and her lips drank, smacked her lips, and regarded us triumphantly. Mr. Johnny be coming home. They've sent him home. They don't want him there no more, since he have disgraced himself over this woman. Oh, I stared down at my plate. I didn't want any of them to notice the effect those words had on me. Johnny's presence in the house changed it for me. I was aware that he was determined to be my lover, and the fact that he now found me installed as a servant in the house amused and delighted him. And the very first day he returned, he sought me out. Oh, I was sitting in my room, reading, when he walked in, and I stood up angrily because he had not asked permission to enter. "Well met, fair maid," he said, bowing ironically. "Will you please knock if you want me?" "Yeah, is it the custom?" "It's what I expect." "You'll always expect more than you receive, Miss ... Carleon." "My name is Carrotsa Carly, and I shall never forget it. Although you did adopt Carleon on one occasion, you've grown beautiful, my dear. What'd you want of me?" Oh, his smile was mocking. "Everything," he retorted. "Just everything. I'm a maid to your sister-in-law." "Oh, I know about that. That's why I came down from Oxford. The news reached me, you see." "I have an idea that it was for a different reason that you came back." "Oh, of course you have. Servants listen at doors, and I'll swear there was some consternation when the news was brought." "Well, I didn't listen at doors, but knowing you, and knowing why young men are usually sent down..." Oh, so knowledgeable you become. I remember the time, but why hark back? Oh, the future promises to be so much more interesting, and I'm looking forward to our future. Carrotsa, I cannot see how yours and mine have anything in common. Can you not? Then you do need educating. I'm satisfied with my education. Never be satisfied, Carrotsa, my dear one. Oh, yeah, it's unwise. Let us begin that education of yours without delay, like this. And he was about to seize me, but I held him off angrily. He shrugged his shoulders. There must be a wooing? Oh, Carrotsa, what a waste of time. Don't you think we've wasted too much already? I asked angrily. I work here, unfortunately, but that does not mean that I'm your servant. Understand this, please. "Oh, why, Carrotsa, why don't you?" "No, all I want is to please you." "Well, that's easy. If you keep out of my way, I shall willingly keep out of yours, and that'll give me great pleasure." "Oh, what words, what airs and graces. Oh, I shouldn't have thought of you, Carrotsa. So I am not to have even a kiss? Well, I shall be here now, and so shall you, under the same roof. Is that not a delightful thought?" Well, he left me then, but there was an ominous look in his eyes. There was no lock on my door, and I was alarmed. The following evening, Justin, Johnny, and Lady St. Lawrence retired to her ladyship's sitting room after dinner, and there was a great deal of serious conversation. Haggerty, who had served there before, told us in the kitchen that Mr. Johnny was being put through his paces, and they were seriously discussing his future. All were very concerned to see him, except Johnny. Well, I was putting Judith's clothes away when she came up. I brushed her hair, as she commanded. It soothed her, and said I had magic in my fingers. Yeah, and I had discovered that I have a gift for hairdressing. Oh, yeah, it is my most successful accomplishment as a lady's maid. I tried different styles on her hair, and sometimes I'd copy them with my own. Oh, this delighted Judith, and because she was generous by nature, she often gave me some little gift, tried to please me. It was she remembered it, but chiefly her thoughts were concerned with her husband. Preparing for her bed was a ritual, and this night there was an air of satisfaction about her. You're aware of the trouble with Mr. Johnny Carrotsa, she said. Yes, ma'am, I've heard it. She shrugged her shoulders. It's unfortunate. Inevitable, though. He's not like, his brother. Well, no, madam. Two brothers could not be less alike. She smiled, more at peace than I had ever seen her before. And I braided her hair and wound it around her head, and she looked lovely in her flowing negligee. You're very beautiful tonight, madam, I told her, because I felt I needed to comfort her. Perhaps after what I had heard in the kitchen. Well, thank you, Garensa, she said. And soon after that, she dismissed me, saying that she would want me no more that night. I went along to Meliora's room and found her sitting by the window, looking out on the moonlit garden. Her tray, symbol of her lonely life, was on a nearby table. So you're free for once, I said. Not for long, she grimaced. I have to go along and sit with Sir Justin in a few minutes. Well, they work you too hard. Oh, I don't mind it. Then she looked radiant. Oh, the look, I thought, of a woman in love. Oh, Meliora, I thought, you'd be very vulnerable, I'm afraid. She went on. Poor Sir Justin. Oh, it's dreadful to see him as he is, and to think of what he was. I remember when Papa, ... Oh, it's unfair that you should have to help nurse him, too, I said. Well, it might be worse. Yes, I thought, but you might be a drudge in a house where there's no Justin. Is that what you mean, isn't it? Then I asked myself what had happened in my relationship with Meliora. Once I would have said to her things I was now thinking. It was not that we had changed. It was just that this dangerous situation was too delicate a matter, too important to Meliora for her to wish to discuss it or take advice, even from me. And now, I said, changing the subject, Johnny is back. Oh, ... Johnny, exclamation point. It's not entirely unexpected. Johnny will always be Johnny. Well, she's almost smug. How different was Justin? She was implying, and then I thought of Judith, who had said almost the same. Two women, both in love with the same man, deeply and passionately. For although Meliora was calm and Judith was far from calm, both were victims of deep emotion. I wish he had not come back home, I said. Are you afraid of him? Well, not exactly afraid, but he could be a nuisance. Or never fear, I shall know how to handle him. Well, I'm sure you will. She turned to look out the window, and I knew that she was not thinking of Johnny and me because her thoughts were all for Justin. Oh, it would be like that in the future. She was obsessed by her love, even as Judith was. Fortunately for Meliora, hers was a more balanced nature. Some bond had snapped between us. For as her emotion deepened for one person, so there became less time in her life for others. I asked her then if she ever heard from Kim, and she was startled for a few seconds, then seemed as though she were in an effort to remember him. Kim? No. He couldn't write, or he wouldn't write. I don't know why I said couldn't. And he always said that he was no letter writer, but that he would come back one day. Do you think he will? Well, of course, it was certain. It was a sort of promise, and Kim always keeps promises. I felt a great pleasure, and I pictured him coming back to St. Lamston, walking into Abbas one day, and I could imagine his voice. Why, Caritza, you've become a fascinating young lady. And then when he saw Meliora, obsessed by Justin, he'd become more my friend than hers. Oh, I was certain that you could make life go the way you wanted it. But is it possible to bring the people you wanted back to you? I must ask Granny. Meliora said that it was time that she went to Sir Justin. So I left her and returned to my room, and I stood at the window for some time, thinking of Kim and the night at the ball. And then I went to my mirror and lighted the candles there. Had I changed much since that night? Had I become older, wiser, more accomplished? I had read a great deal. I was making myself worthy of Kim? No, of the person I intended to be. Well, I took the pins out of my hair and shook it about my shoulders. Thick, luxuriant. It was more beautiful than Judith's. Deftly, I began to coil it high on my head. Where was my Spanish comb? Where is my mantilla? I adjusted them and stood enraptured by my own reflection. Narcissus, I mocked. In love with yourself. Burp, I went to the window, and out there was the ring of stones that never seemed to be far from my thoughts. I had always promised myself a visit by moonlight. Why not? I was free. I believed Johnny was closeted with his brother. Oh, there was no danger of him being around. Now was the time. I was soon there. How exciting they seemed by moonlight. Alive! Exclamation point. The 6 virgins! Exclamation point. And I made a 7th. Did it really happen, as the legend said? Did they, in truth, dance here? Were they struck down in their defiance and turned to stone to stand on the spot as centuries passed? Oh, how fortunate they were. Sudden death was preferable to a lingering one. I thought of the seventh. Oh, the one who had been dragged to the hollow wall. The one who was shut in to die. And I was filled with a momentary melancholy. Footsteps! The sound was a low whistle. I leaned against one of the stones. Burp, waiting, some instinct telling me who had followed me there. So the seventh is here tonight. I felt furious at myself for coming. Johnny had seen me leave the house after all, and in that moment, I hated him. He had stepped into the circle of stones and was grinning at me. Mrs. Carleon in person, he cried, the Spanish lady. Is there a reason why I should not dress my hair as I wish? Well, there's every reason why you should, since it becomes you. And I wish you would not follow me. Follow you? Oh, why should I? Not visit the virgins if I wish. They are not exclusively yours, are they? Well, since when have you come to see the virgins? I will leave you. There's no hurry. I prefer the seventh to all the six put together. Ladies of stone are not to my fancy, yet the seventh would have me believe she is composed of the same unyielding material. I'm going to prove to her that she is not. Is it impossible for you to believe that I don't want your advances? Quite impossible. That are you more arrogant than I imagine? I'll tell you something, a Spanish lady, that you would not reject my advances in some circumstances. I don't understand you. Well, you've always had a mighty high opinion of yourself. And if I said to you, Carissa, will you marry me? Would you consider my proposal very seriously? And you warned it, would it take very long to recognize its merits? And it merely is because you think that I would treat you like any serving girl because you are so haughty. Well, I caught my breath, for his words had conjured up a picture of myself living at the Abbas, as I had always longed to, and it had seemed an impossibility. But if I married Johnny, my dream would come true. With a shock, I realized this was the only way in which it could. But almost immediately, I knew that he was teasing me. I said, haughtily, I do not wish to listen to any more suggestions you make. Then he laughed. Yeah, only because you know that the one you want to hear is the one I should offer. No, I turned away and caught my arm. Carissa, he began, put his face close to mine, and the blaze of desire in his eyes alarmed me, and I tried not to show my fear by slapping off his arm, but he would not release me, and he kept his face close to mine, grinning at me. I, he said, can be determined as you. You don't want to know how determined I can be when it's a matter of ridding myself of you. Then, he said, we shall see, shall we not? In spite of my efforts, I could not free myself. He caught me to him, and I felt his teeth against mine. I kept mine firmly clenched, and I hated him. I hated him so fiercely that I found a certain pleasure in my hatred. In that moment, Johnny St. Lamston aroused an emotion in me that I had never felt before. It's not without desire. Perhaps I thought later, when I was alone and trying to analyze my feelings, the desire I felt was for a house, which is so weird. She's so focused on living at the Abbas that and she's trying to use manifestation to make things happen. And she gets this, and she thinks about it for a minute because a house is so important to her. It's weird. For a different station of life that into my which had been born, for fulfillment of my dream. My desire for these things was so fierce that perhaps another kind of desire could be aroused by anyone who could give them to me. And Johnny's words about marriage had put an idea into my mind. Yep, stupid. One thing I was sure of. You must not guess for a moment that he aroused anything in me but contempt and a longing to be rid of him. Holding myself away from him, I said, you are better be careful, and I shall complain if you attempt to persecute me, and in view of your reputation, I do not think should be delivered. I knew then that he had been aware of some change in my feelings, and that he was expecting me to give me away. Thus, I took him off guard, and with a little push as I had another occasion, I freed myself. I turned and walked haughtily towards the house, and when I reached my room, I looked in the mirror. Is it possible, I asked myself, would Johnny St. Lamston consider marrying me? And if he did, would I accept? Just so she could live in a house. I'm already losing respect for this person. Oh, I was trembling. With hope? Question mark? With fear? With pleasure? With repulsion? I was not sure which. My room was touched by moonlight, and I sat up at the start. Something had awakened me. I was in danger. An extra sense seemed to be telling me this. I stared in dismay, for someone was in my room, and I saw a outline of a figure seated in an armchair, watching me. I gave a stifled cry, for the figure had moved. I have always thought the Abbas was haunted. Now I know. Oh, I heard a low laugh. I knew it was my visitor, Johnny, as you should have guessed. You, I cried, how dare you? And he sat on the edge of my bed looking at me. I am very daring, Karen said, particularly where you're concerned. This guy is creepy as hell. Why would she sit around considering marrying him when he's got a long history of being just a creepy-ass... right. You'd better go, without delay. Oh, no, you don't think I'd rather stay? I sprang out of bed, and he stood up, but he did not come towards me. He merely stood staring at me. Well, I always wondered how you wore your hair at night. 2 long plaits, most demure, and I should like to see it loose, though. If you do not leave at once, I shall shout for help. Well, I shouldn't do that, Carissa, if I were you. You are not me, and I tell you I shall. Why cannot you be reasonable? Why cannot you behave like a gentleman? To you, who are scarcely a lady, I hate you, Johnny St. Lamston. At this point, is she still considering marrying him so she can live in the house? We'll find out. Now, that sounded like the little girl from the cottages, but I'd rather you hated me than you were indifferent. I got no feelings for you, none at all. Well, you got no feeling for the truth, and you know you hate me, and you're longing for me to make love to you. This is so weird. But you feel that the lady you are trying to become should insist on marriage before entertaining a lover. I ran to the door and flung it open. I said, I will give you 10 seconds, Johnny St. Lamston. If you're not outside by then, and if you attempt to touch me, I shall scream to wake your brother and his wife. Well, he could see I meant what I said and was temporarily defeated. Now he walked past me into the corridor, and his eyes were angry and malevolent. I was horrified because I realized that he really believed I would have become his mistress that night. I went into my room, and shut my door, and I leaned against it, trembling. How, I asked myself, was I going to rest in peace, knowing that any hour of the night he could walk into my room? That's right, she doesn't have a lock on her door. I could not go back to bed. I went to the window and looked out at it. The moonlight showed me the lawn, and beyond it, the meadow with the ring of stones. Well, I stood there for some time. I heard a clock strike midnight, and then I saw Johnny. He is walking purposely away from the house, and I stood there watching him as he skirted the field and took the road toward the village. It led also to Lardston Barton. Some instinct told me, having failed with me, Johnny was going to Hetty Pengaster. I crept along the corridor to Meliora's room and knocked gently at the door. Well, there's no reply, so I went in. Meliora was asleep. I stood for a few seconds looking down at her. It's creepy. So beautiful, creepy, and innocent she looked, creepy, lying there. Meliora, too, I thought, was defenseless in this house. Oh, and also in this moment. This is also creepy. But Justin would never come uninvited into her room. Even so, Meliora was more vulnerable than I. Meliora, I whispered. Don't be alarmed. It is I, Karensa. Karensa, she started up alarmed. Whatever's wrong? Well, it's all right now, but I don't want to go back into my room. What do you mean? Something's wrong? Johnny came in, and I don't feel safe when he can come walking in when he likes. Johnny, she said contemptuously. I nodded. Now he's trying to seduce me, and I'm afraid of him. Oh, Karensa. Well, don't be alarmed. I only wanted to come in with you. She moved over, and I slipped into the bed. Oh, you're shivering, she said. That's rather horrible. You don't think you ought to go away? Away from the Abbas? Where to? I don't know. Somewhere. To work at some other house? To beat the beck and call of someone else? Well, perhaps, Karensa, it would be best for both of us. It was the first time she'd admitted her own difficulties, and I was afraid. In that moment, I was certain I would never willingly leave the Abbas. Well, I can manage Johnny, I said. But this latest affair, well, it will make everyone understand whose fault it is if I should have to tell on him. Karen said, you're so strong, and I had to look after myself all my life. Oh, you had your father to look after you. Don't worry about me, Meliora. She was silent for a while. Then she said, perhaps for us both, Karen said. Well, we couldn't go farther and fare worse, I quoted. I felt relief and a little sigh she gave. Where'd you find post together, she asked. Where? And St. Lamsted is, after all, home to us. Well, we were silent for a while. Then I said, may I share your room in future while he is here? You know you may. Then, I said, there will be nothing to fear. Well, it's a long time before either of us slept. Judith knew, of course, that I was sleeping in Meliora's room, and when I hinted at the reason, made no objection. During the weeks that followed, Meliora and I grew close again, for sharing a room meant sharing confidences, and our relationship was more as it had been in the parsonage than it had been since we came to the Abbas, and her feeling for Justin had set us a little apart. I received a letter from David Killigrew during that time, and he thought of me constantly. He wrote. His mother was as strong as ever physically, but growing a little more forgetful every day, and kept busy, but he saw no hope of getting a living, which he implied he must do before asking me to marry him. Well, I could scarcely remember what he looked like. Nice. Here's a guy that's actually literally pining for you, just sitting around thinking about you in his free time, especially when he's lying in bed. And then she forgot what he even looks like. I felt guilty because he's so earnest. And at one time I had contemplated marrying him. Yeah, why would you forget his face? You actually thought about marrying him. Deep down in my heart, I was contemplating marrying Johnny St. Lamston. It's like all books from this period, or written in that period. Was marriage just like a throwaway thing, like getting a job or something? Now people get married and it's a huge deal. You take it real seriously. You're not going to forget what the guy's face looks like that plans on marrying you. I can't imagine this day and age, me going to my now wife, before she's my wife, and saying, Madam, I intend to marry you, as if she doesn't really have a say in it. And then if she seems okay with it, I'm like, wait till I get a good job. Seems so weird. I could scarcely remember what he looked like. I felt guilty. I already read this part. What sort of a woman was I asked myself, who was ready to turn this way and that for the sake of expediency? Well, I tried to make excuses for myself. I had fabricated a dream, and the fulfillment of that dream was the most important thing in my life. I wanted a position for myself that I might suffer no more humiliation. I wanted to give Granny comfort in her old age. I wanted to make a doctor of Joe. Now, it was ironical that Johnny... Ironical? Is that really a word? Let's look it up. Ironic, yes, but ironical? No. When I click on it, the dictionary just says ironic. Got any derivatives? Oh, ironical is an adjective. Okay, apparently it's a real word. It's a stupid word. And that Johnny, who I told myself I hated, was the only one who held the key to all that. Oh, it was a key he would be reluctant to relinquish. But perhaps if he were pushed hard, she really is considering marrying Johnny. He wasn't serious. All right, fine. Johnny was watching me with his smoldering eyes. He was eager for me as he ever was. And yet he made no move because he doesn't want you. I suspected that he had been in my room and found it empty. He would guess where I was, but he dared not come into Meliora's. I continued to hear Judith's raised voice in the apartments she shared with Justin, and I knew that she was growing more and more restless. As for Meliora, well, she seemed to be living in a state of exaltation. I believed I knew why, because I'd seen her and Justin together one day from my window. They met accidentally. And exchanged only a word. But I watched him look after her as she passed. I saw her turn to look at him, and for a few seconds, they stood still, just gazing at one another. They had betrayed themselves. Judith's suspicions had some foundation. They loved each other, and they had admitted it, if not in words, by a look. We were seated at the table when the clanging of the bell from Sir Justin's room started up. For a few seconds, we stared at each other. Then Haggerty, followed by Mrs. Holt, hurried upstairs. We all looked at each other, for the bell went on clanging until they reached the room. We knew that this was no ordinary call. In a few moments, Haggerty returned to the kitchen. Polor was to go at once for Dr. Hillard. Then he had gone. We sat at the table, but we did not eat. Oh, Mrs. Salt said mournfully, "This'll be the end, you see, and if you were to ask me, it'll be a happy release." Dr. Hillard was fortunately at home, and within a half hour he came back with Polor. He spent a long time in Sir Justin's room. Attention had fallen in the house. Everyone spoke in whispers, and when Dr. Hillard left, Haggerty told us that Sir Justin had another stroke. No, he was still alive, but in his opinion, it wouldn't last the night. Well, I went up with Judith to prepare her night things, and I found her quieter than usual. Oh, she told me that Justin was with her father. The whole family were there. This is not entirely unexpected, madam, I said, and she shook her head. Oh, it had to happen sooner or later. And is it the end, madam? Who can say? He's not dead yet. Soon, I thought, she will be Lady St. Lamston, and Justin will be the head of the house. It'd make no difference to me, but Meliora? No, I believe Justin hated to see his mother bullying Meliora. When he was Sir Justin, what would he do to prevent it? Would he betray his feelings? Well, life never remains stationary, I thought. A little change here, a little change there, and what was safe and normal becomes no longer so. I thought of the seventh virgin of the legend who had meditated not far from where I was standing and who had taken her vows and no doubt believed that she would live the rest of her life in peaceful security. And then she loved and she submitted to love, and the result was lingering death in the convent wall. Dr. Hillard came twice a day, and each morning we believed that Sir Justin would be dead before the day was over. But for a week, he lingered on. Meliora is in constant attendance. She was excused from her duties of reading and flower gathering. Perp. And I went back to my own room, for she was needed in the sick room. And since I was alone, there was no point in being in hers. Oh, God, more burps. She had a little rest during those sick days, but she did not seem to need it. She had lost a little weight, which was rather becoming. Weird, gross, dumb. Don't do that. This book was made in the 60s or 70s. When was this book made? I'll look it up later. And there was a shine about her. From losing a lot of weight from not eating. I, who knew her so well, understood that just for a while she was content to bask in the knowledge that Justin loved her. Perhaps, I thought, they could go on like this for the rest of their lives. What? Theirs would be a relationship of ideals, unsullied by any physical need. Justin would never be a passionate man, well, he's dying, and Meliora would be ready to adapt herself in his ways. It would be a sublimated love, and they would be kept apart always by the flaming sword of propriety and convention and illness. What a contrast! With this profane attraction, which Johnny had for me, and I, perhaps, for him. Sir Justin was dead, and there was a lightening of the atmosphere as preparation for the funeral began, and at the windows, the blinds were drawn. We moved about the house in somber gloom, and there was no real sadness, though, for no one had loved Sir Justin, and his death had been expected for so long. It was a question of, Sir Justin is dead. Long live Sir Justin. And the servants slipped naturally into a new form of address. Am I going crazy? There's two I'm going to move on. Judith had already become my lady, and almost imperceptibly, the Dowager Lady St. Lamston moved slightly into the background. Everyone attached to the house wore black crepe bands about their arms for quote-unquote respect. And Mrs. Holt, a collection was made in the kitchens, and with both Meliora and myself were invited to add our share, there was a great excitement when the wreath arrived. The gates of heaven ajar, which had been Mrs. Holt's choice. When I asked if they thought Sir Justin would go to heaven, from what I had heard, his life had not been exemplary. I was regarded by shocked eyes, and Doll gave a squeal as she looked over her shoulder, half expecting she explained, Sir Justin shade to come into the kitchen and strike me dead with a copper stick. weird, which Daisy had brought in from the wash house and had forgotten to take back. That's really specific, as far as ghosts attacking you. Didn't I know that it was dangerous to speak ill of the dead? Didn't I know that the dead were sanctified? Oh, no matter if Sir Justin had taken unwilling maidens, no matter if he had sent men, women, and young children to the hulks of transportation for no greater sin than trespassing on his estates, he was dead now and therefore a saint. Well, I felt impatient with them, nor was I afraid of the ghost of Sir Justin, but it was no use trying to explain. The Black Mutes had done their duty. The velvet, caparisoned horses had carried their sacred burden away, and the funeral was over. I was no longer afraid of Johnny. In fact, I was rather eager for more encounters with him. I'd been to see Granny while Sir Justin was so ill, and I had talked to her about Johnny. She's very thoughtful. Then she said, the fact that he talked of marriage would seem to show that he had it in mind. This is not like a magical witch. This is just a person. Only, I replied, as something which could not possibly take place. Granny shook her head and regarded me fondly. Oh, Karen says, she said, I'd be ready to swear that if you were dressed up like a lady and taken where no one knew you, they'd think you were one. And I knew it was true, for I had worked with all my strength towards this end, and it was the first and essential step. Granny, I said, he would never marry me. My mother would never allow it, nor would his brother. Oh, his mother would never allow it, nor his brother. Oh, I was going to say, where the hell's your mother? I narrowed my eyes, thinking of Justin, who would be from now on the head of the house. Oh, he had a secret. His love for Meliora. But was it a secret? Wasn't it already suspected in the servants' hall? Still, he was vulnerable, and with such a secret, was he in a position to harm me? So, you think now, my love, but who is to say what the future holds? Who would have thought you'd ever read and write and talk like one of they? Now, who would have thought it? I echoed, and then I seized her hand. Granny, I said, could you give me some kind of potion? Well, she snatched her hand away, laughing with mockery. She's not like an actual magical witch. She's just a person. Like, she even says all my stuff is bullshit. It's just placebo. Laughing with mockery. And I thought you'd be educated. Have you forgotten what I did tell E? The future is for you to make. You can have what you can want if you're ready to pay the price for it. Everyone can. You must never forget that the price has to be paid, and it's sometimes more than you had bargained for. Carrots, huh? Oh, she was very serious. Listen to what I be saying, and don't forget about it. I lay at Meliora's bed when the house was quiet, and I would go back to my own room. But what do you want, Carrots? She said. Do you feel safe? I'm safe from Johnny, I was scornful. Don't worry on my account. I know how to handle Johnny. Well, she clasped her hands behind her back and looked up at the ceiling. Again, I can only describe her expression as exalted. Meliora, I said, you should tell me. Tell you? Something's happened, hasn't it? You know well enough what's happened. There's been a death in the house. Well, it was hardly unexpected. Death is always a shock, expected or not. Well, I would not say that you're shocked. No. I could see the confidences trembling on her lips. Oh, she wanted to tell me, but it was not for her secret alone. I was determined that she should tell me. I seemed to hear Granny's voice in my ear. It's important to learn everything. You can't deceive me, Meliora. Something has happened. Well, she turned to look at me, and I saw that she was startled. Oh, she reminded me of a dainty gazelle who just heard a rustle in the undergrowth, and while wanting to satisfy curiosity, knows it's wiser to run away. But she was not going to run away from me. And, I went on firmly, it has something to do with Justin. Sir Justin, she said softly. I see Sir Justin now, I agree, the head of the house. Well, how different he would be from his father. How the tenants will love him, and he will be kind as he is Justin, and his name implies. Well, I made an impatient gesture. I didn't want a eulogy of the new Sir Justin. Now he'll be perfect in every way, I said, except that he has been foolish enough to marry the wrong woman. Karen, so what are you saying? Oh, you heard me perfectly. And I am only saying what has been in your thoughts for a long time. And perhaps his too. You must never say that to anyone else, Karen. And if I should, this is between us two. You know that I would always be on your side, Meliora. Oh, you're close to me. We're close as sisters, huh? No? Closer? Shall I never forget you took me from the hiring stand and made me your sister? In a way, you made me what I am, Meliora. It's by the luck of the fact that her actual sister with the same name died. The bond between us is stronger than a blood tie, even. Well, she turned to me suddenly and threw herself against me. I held her tightly while her body heaved with silent sobs. Oh, you should tell me, I said. You should know that everything that happens to you is my concern. You love Justin, Sir Justin. I have known it a long time. Well, how can anyone help loving such a man, Karensa? Well, I manage very well, which is fortunate. But it would not do for everyone to be in love with him. I have known for a long time what your feelings were. But what of his? Oh, she withdrew herself and lifted her face to mine. Well, he loves me, Karensa. He thinks he's always loved me. Only he did not know until it was too late. Has he told you this? Well, he would not have done so, but it was when we were both sitting by his father's bedside. It was after midnight. The house was so quiet, there's a moment when it was impossible to hide the truth. Really? Next to the dying man. If he always loved you, why'd he marry Judith? I demanded. You see, Karensa, he looked upon me as a child. He seemed so much older, because when he knew me first, I was only a child, and we went on thinking of me as one. And then there was Judith. Judith. He married her, you know. We didn't want to, Karen, so it was against his will. And what kind of a man is he to marry against his will? No, you don't understand. He is good and kind and that he married her. I shrugged my shoulders, and I could see that she was battling with herself, wondering whether she should tell me. But she could not bear my unspoken criticism of Justin, so she decided to. His father wanted the marriage before he was ill, but Justin refused because he did not want to marry until he was in love. His father was furious, but there were so many scenes, and then it was during one of those that he had his first stroke. Justin was horrified, you see, because he felt responsible, and then his father was so ill that he thought it would help him recover if he did what he wanted. So he married Judith and soon knew what a terrible mistake it was. Well, I was silent. I believed Justin had told her the truth. Oh, they were two of a kind, she and Justin. How admirably suited they were. I thought, if she had married Justin, I should have come here in a very different capacity. Oh, why hadn't Meliora married Justin? I pictured them, one on either side of that dying man who had played such a part in their lives, their whispered confidences, their longings. Meliora, I said, what are you going to do? She opened her eyes incredulously. Do? What can we do? He is married to Judith, is he not? I didn't speak. I knew that for a while. It was enough for her to know that he loved her. But how long would she, or he, be content with that? The blinds were up at all the windows. I felt that everywhere there would be a subtle change. Nothing could be quite the same again. Old Lady St. Lamston had talked half-heartedly of going to the Dower House, but when Justin had urged her to remain at the Abbas, she had been delighted to do so. The new Sir Justin, whatever, a new Lady St. Lamston, I hate these names, but those were merely names. Yes, stupid names. I saw Justin's eyes follow Meliora, and I knew that confession of theirs had changed their relationship. However much they believed it had not. Oh, how long, I wondered, did they think that they could keep their secret from such as Mrs. Holt, Haggerty, and Mrs. Salt? Well, there'd always be more gossip in the kitchens. Perhaps it was already started. But how long, before Judith was aware that she, who had watched her husband every second, was in her company? Already she suspected that his feelings toward Meliora were dangerously strong. The atmosphere was filled with danger, tense and quiet, waiting for disaster. But it was my own affairs which were absorbing me, because Johnny's passion for me was increasing, and the more aloof I became, the more determined he was. He never attempted to come to my bedroom again, but whenever I went out, I would find him walking by my side. Sometimes he cajoled, sometimes he blazed, but his conversation was all on one theme. Again and again, I told him that he was wasting his time. He retorted that I was wasting our time. If you're waiting for marriage, you will wait A long time, he said angrily. But you happen to be right. I am waiting for marriage, but not with you. David Killigrew, that she can't remember his face, wants to marry me as soon as he gets a living. Oh, David Killigrew? Oh, you plan to be a parson's wife? Oh, what a joke. While your feeling for humor is rather childish, of course, there is nothing funny in this, I assure you. It's a very serious matter. Oh, poor Killigrew, he snorted, and he left me. But he was uneasy, and I knew that to possess me had become an obsession with him. Whenever possible, I went to go see Granny, and there was nothing I enjoyed more than stretching out on the towel fat. Did I already look up towel fat? Let's see what a towel fat is. That's right, there was nothing about towel fat. That's the reason why I've done this already. And talking to her, I used to when I was a child. I knew that my affairs were as important to her as they were to me, and that she was the only person in the world with whom I could be absolutely frank. We discussed the possibility of marriage with David Killigrew. Granny shook her head over it. Nah, it'd be good, lovey, for some, but I reckon you'd always be a hankering. Meaning that she's going to cheat on him. You're not going to say Johnny St. Lawrenson's the man for me. Well, if you married him, you'd be marrying a dream, Karen, sir. A dream that's going to cheat on you. And that would not be good? Oh, 'tis only to make you good or bad, lovey. Well, in that case, I could make a marriage of David good or bad? She nodded. That seems like a good place to leave off. On this nightmare of marrying someone for the rest of your life that they just do casually without really thinking about it, why don't we go down to the smoking room where we can have a cigarette and kind of review what the hell we just read for the last 2 hours. Well, there you go. Once you get self-settled, here in my smoking room, where my wife decided to put a bunch of birds, which all the little birds have lung cancer from all the cigarettes I smoke in here, but their lungs seem to work fine. They never seem to actually decline or die. Bert, what did we just read? Almost 2 hours. I think I have to keep doing 2-hour-long episodes to get through this book. I'm only halfway right now. A little over halfway, maybe. The point is, I'm going to have to keep powering through this, which is exhausting for me and boring as hell for you. Any of you nerds that actually stuck around this long to listen to the very end to hear me talk right now, go find something else to do with your life. You could be a lot happier, damn it, if you just went out and rode a bike competitively or something. But instead, you're listening to this bullshit. What's going on? Well, things are starting to pick up, but nothing spooky. I'm waiting for the spooky part. Where's the ghost? Where's the murder? Where's the gothic part of the romance? So far, it's just Karen doesn't like Johnny because he's like a rapist kind of creepy person. Then she's got the other guy who's a parson who's like, I love you, but I got to get a good job. And she's already kind of forgot about him. So we already know she doesn't want to be with him because subconsciously she has no interest in him, even though I guess he's supposed to make the most sense. I don't know, whatever. But then there's Johnny, who is already rich and running around being handsome with his cock out. And then she's actually considering marrying him if he can actually, she can convince him to do it, which is weird. It's a weird time. This person who wrote this book, which I just looked up, it's 1965. So also this author is a huge nerd when it comes to history. So she's all about knowing about what life was like back at the time she's writing for that time period, whatever. So apparently in this time period, you'll just marry someone to have access to things or access to a lifestyle. Am I judging it? No. Life for women back then was nightmarish and horrible. So here, Karen just wants to live at the Abbas real bad, real bad. And she will literally marry a man that cornered her and tried to molest her during a party. Okay, can I judge that mindset of that time? Also, it's an author imagining what the mindset of the time is like. So I don't really know how true this scenario is. Oh, who knows? Is it an opportunist person that will marry this kind of man, or is it just the way life was back then? I don't know. This is an author that wrote this in 1965. But anyways, Meliora is in love with the head of the household as they sit over the dying father and just talk about it. So there's going to be that conflict to deal with. So I can appreciate the romantic conflict that she's set up, and the author did do a good job setting this romantic conflict up. It's not bad or anything. It's just 400 and some pages worth of it. When I want to get to the stone virgins, I want to know what the hell that's all about. They kind of hint at it a little bit, but then we're all wrapped up in this like romancy stuff and the rapey guy and then the pastor guy and whatever. And Meliora, who was once kind of a rich kid that suddenly is now the servant, so she's kind of getting beaten down, but all of a sudden in her own way, she's kind of finding an escape from that by getting emotionally or convincing herself she's emotionally involved with this man. And then also they had a discussion about it over the dying father. It's good writing. It's not bad. I'm 200 some pages in, and I just kind of want to know when we're going to find out about these virgin statues. God damn it. When does the ghostly / murder stuff start? Well, I got to go to a wedding, and I got to wake up at 4 a.m. to go do it. So I am going to go to bed and upload this episode, and then you can all just enjoy the 5 people that listened all the way to the end. And then I will see you probably next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, there's that. Are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people, not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com, which just points you to my link tree. Everything's on the link tree. Just go to the link tree if you want to see where I am. And of course, link tree has the dumbest URL in the world. linktr.ee/nuzzlehouse. It's the dumbest thing. If you go to nuzzlehouse.com, it's just going to reroute you over there after giving you some weird error about it not being secure. I hate it. I hate the internet. But if you go there, you get to hear some of the other stuff that I and my wife work on, like the Radio Mystery Theater show, where we try to recreate the same show that used to be on in the 70s, but they don't make any episodes anymore. So we make our own, and we just steal all their commercials. And also, just stay in the curious mind, we made a Christmas album. If you go to our link tree, you can see that we made a Christmas album. It's the first thing we did after getting married, which I think everyone should do when they get married, is start talking about the Christmas album they're going to make. And we're working on a new show where we give relationship advice by reading paranormal smut. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly, glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdling or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.